My name is Cecilia Valerius, and I am 32 years old. For most of my life, I have been an architect, though for a long time, the only people who would have used that word to describe me were myself and my old professor. To my own family, I was something else entirely, a hobbyist, a dreamer, a well-meaning distraction from the real world of business and construction, the world of steel, concrete, and consequence that they so proudly inhabited. They invited me to stand in the back at the press conference celebrating their company's greatest triumph, a contract to build the new City Science Museum. They saw it as a kindness, a token gesture to the family's resident artist. They never suspected that their greatest triumph was also my own. They had no idea they were contractually bound to build the anonymous design the city had fallen in love with, and that in a few short minutes, the mayor would call me, their distraction, to the podium as the sole architect of the project they were now obligated to create under my direct supervision. Before I tell you how the foundation of my family's world cracked wide open in the gilded ballroom of City Hall, I want to hear from you. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've ever had someone you love look right through you, or dismiss a dream that you have poured your entire soul into, please hit that like button, so I know I'm not alone. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. This is a community for people who have learned to build their own foundations when the ones they were given proved to be made of sand. My story really begins not with a building, but with a box of dirt. When I was 8 years old, my father, Richard Valerius, gave my brother Leo and me a challenge. He set 2 large, identical wooden trays on the vast oak table in our dining room. Leo, who was 4 years older and already a miniature version of our father in both posture and ambition, was given a massive bin of Legos, a sea of primary-colored plastic. I was given a spade and access to the rich, dark soil of our backyard. The instructions were simple. Show me what you can build. Show me your vision. Leo spent the afternoon meticulously clicking bricks together. He built a towering skyscraper, a gray and black monolith that scraped the sky of his imagination. It was angular, powerful, and brutally simple. When he was done, he presented it to my father with a proud jut of his chin. My father's chest swelled. He placed a heavy, approving hand on Leo's shoulder. "That's it, son," he said, his voice resonating with pride. "Strong lines. A solid foundation. You see the world as it should be built. You have a legacy in you." Then they turned to me. I hadn't built up, I had built in and out. My tray was a sprawling, intricate landscape. I had spent hours observing a colony of ants in the garden, and I had recreated their world. Tunnels burrowed through the soil, leading to chambers for food storage and nurseries. I had used twigs to create structural supports and blades of grass to weave a canopy that would channel morning dew down to a central reservoir I'd lined with a smooth stone. It was a living system, a microcosm of collaboration and ingenious, natural engineering. I explained it all breathlessly, pointing out the ventilation shafts, the load-bearing columns of packed earth. When I finished, my father stared at my creation for a long moment. There was no pride in his eyes, only a sort of weary confusion. "Cecilia," he said, and the word was heavy like a sigh. "It's creative, but it's a box of dirt. It's messy." He nudged one of my twig supports with his finger, and a small section of tunnel collapsed. "There's no permanence here. It's a distraction. Leo builds skylines. You, my dear, make mud pies." That was the moment the blueprint of our family was drawn for me. Leo was the heir, the builder of legacies. I was the mud pie maker, the creator of pretty, temporary things. My vision, as he had called it, was a flaw. This dynamic hardened over the years, settling into the bedrock of our relationship. When Leo wanted a summer job at Valerius Construction, he was given a hard hat and a spot shadowing a foreman. When I asked for the same opportunity a few years later, my father smiled that same tired smile. "Cece, the construction site is no place for you. It's loud, it's dirty. Why don't you help your mother with the rose garden? You're so good with plants." So I did. But while my hands were tending to the aphids on the climbing roses, my mind was devouring books I'd ordered secretly online. I read about the structural integrity of beehives, the passive cooling systems of termite mounds, the way a lily pad distributes weight across its surface. I learned that nature was the greatest architect of all, and it never wasted a single joule of energy or gram of material. Nature didn't do messy. It did perfect, ruthless efficiency. My father and brother, with their diesel-guzzling cranes and mountains of rebar, were the ones making a mess. They just couldn't see it. The schism became a chasm when it was time for university. Leo had, of course, gone to the state university's reputable but unremarkable engineering school, a direct pipeline into the family business. I had my sights set higher. I had been accepted into a world-renowned architectural program, one famous for its pioneering work in sustainable design and biomimicry. The acceptance letter felt like a golden ticket, a validation of every secret hour I had spent studying. I presented it to my father at dinner, my hands trembling slightly. He read it, his brow furrowed. He passed it to Leo, who glanced at it and snorted. Sustainable architecture? Leo said, the words dripping with derision. So, you're going to learn how to build yurts out of recycled plastic bottles? Real architects build things that last 1,000 years, Cece. Things that define a city, not compost heaps. My father cleared his throat, the sound of dismissal. Your brother has a point, Cecilia. It's a niche. A fad. There's no money in it, no prestige. Our name, the Valerius name, is built on strength. On monuments of steel and stone that tell the world we were here. This green nonsense, it's transient. It's weak. He looked at me, and his expression was one of genuine disappointment. I thought you'd outgrow the mud pies. I went anyway. The pain of their disapproval was a physical ache, but the thought of giving up, of admitting they were right, was worse. My university years were a liberation. I was surrounded by people who saw the world as I did, who understood that a building could be more than a box to keep the rain out. It could be a living, breathing organism, a partner with its environment rather than a conqueror of it. My mentor and professor, Dr. Eris Thorne, was a legend in the field. He was a man with a mind like a razor and a spirit that saw poetry in physics. He saw my portfolio, the one filled with sketches of buildings inspired by nautilus shells and forests, and he didn't see weakness. He saw the future. They don't understand, do they? He said to me one afternoon in his office, which was cluttered with botanical drawings and strange, beautiful models of crystalline structures. Your family. They see concrete as strength and your work as a flight of fancy. They call it a distraction, I whispered, the word tasting like ash. Dr. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes intense. Cecilia, never forget this. What they call a distraction is a paradigm shift. They are building the past. Solid, heavy, and already obsolete. You are designing the future. It's light, it's intelligent, and it's alive. Don't you ever let them convince you otherwise. His words were a shield. I carried them with me when I graduated, top of my class, and returned to my home city. I was full of hope, naively believing that my degree, my portfolio, my passion, would finally be enough to earn their respect. I requested a formal meeting at the Valerius Construction headquarters, a monolithic black tower that Leo had helped design. It was the architectural equivalent of a power suit, intimidating, soulless, and desperate to be taken seriously. I laid out my proposal on their massive, polished boardroom table. I had prepared a comprehensive plan for a new division within the company, Valerius Sustainable Projects. I had market analysis, profit projections, and a portfolio of conceptual designs that could revolutionize their brand. Living walls that filtered the air, roofs that harvested solar and water, buildings that would produce more energy than they consumed. My father sat at the head of the table, steepling his fingers, his face an unreadable mask. Leo, sitting to his right, couldn't even feign interest. He openly scrolled through his phone as I spoke. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Richard finally picked up one of my renderings, a design for a community library modeled on the spiral of a snail's shell. He held it as if it were a soiled tissue. This is all very charming, Cecilia, he said, the word charming a sanitized insult. But our clients are not snails. They are corporations, city governments. They want to project power, dominance. They don't want to look like a vegetable patch. This is not our brand. Leo finally looked up from his phone. Look, Cece, I'll be blunt. This is a PR gimmick. It's not serious. We pour 10,000 tons of concrete a week. We can't be stopping to ask if the rebar is ethically sourced or if the foundation is upsetting the local earthworms. It's a construction business, not a nature preserve. He tossed a pen onto my proposal. We're not interested. The finality in his voice was like a door slamming shut. They didn't just disagree with my ideas. They were fundamentally incapable of understanding them. To them, my life's work was still just a mud pie, albeit a more expensive one. I walked out of that soulless tower with my portfolio clutched to my chest, the sting of humiliation hot on my cheeks. That day I made a decision. If I couldn't join them, I would have to beat them. I rented a tiny, cramped office above a bakery that always smelled of burnt sugar. I used my meager savings to buy a used drafting table and a temperamental computer. I founded my own firm, Ethelgard Designs. The name was an old word meaning noble protector. A silent promise to myself that I would protect my vision, my distraction, from the world. My first few years were a struggle. I took any job I could get. I designed a zero-carbon renovation for a young couple's home, a beautiful community garden pavilion for a neighborhood association, a bird-watching hide for a local nature reserve. Each project was a tiny victory, a small, perfect testament to my principles. I poured my heart into them. I was proud of the work. But to my family, my small successes were just further proof of my irrelevance. At the obligatory Sunday dinners, my work was a running joke. "How's the birdhouse business, Cece?" Leo would ask, a smug smirk on his face as he detailed his latest multi-million-dollar contract for a parking garage. My father would just shake his head sadly, as if I were a lost cause he had to charitably endure. Their condescension was a constant, grinding weight. It chipped away at my confidence, leaving me raw and exhausted. There were nights I would sit in my tiny office, staring at my designs, and their voices would echo in my head. Asterisk a fad. A distraction. Mud pies. Asterisk I would feel a wave of despair, so profound it felt like I was drowning. Was I a fool? Was I wasting my life on a dream that no one else could see? It was during one of those dark moments that Dr. Thorne called me. He had been following my small projects, sending me notes of encouragement. "I just heard something that made me think of you," he said, his voice crackling with energy. "The city. They've announced the competition for the new science museum." My heart sank. "Eris, that's way out of my league. That's a Valerius construction kind of project." "Exactly," he countered. "They will certainly bid on the construction. But the design is a separate, international competition. And here's the beautiful part, Cecilia. It is completely 100% anonymous. The judges will not see a name, a firm, or a reputation. They will see only the design. They have specifically requested a landmark building that embodies the spirit of innovation and ecological responsibility." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This isn't about legacy or power, Cecilia. It's about vision. It's a competition made for you." A tiny, flickering flame of hope ignited in my chest. An anonymous competition. A level playing field. A chance for the work to speak for itself, free from the shadow of my last name and the weight of my family's prejudice. "They'll never know it's me," I whispered, the thought both terrifying and exhilarating. "No," Dr. Thorne said, his voice soft but firm. "They will only know the architecture. And I have a feeling that will be more than enough." That phone call changed everything. The Science Museum competition became my secret obsession. A consuming fire that burned away the self-doubt and left only a core of white-hot determination. For the next 2 months, my life shrank to the 4 walls of my office and the glowing screen of my computer. I worked with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. Sleep became a luxury, food an afterthought. My world was filled with calculations, stress simulations, and endless sketches. I knew I couldn't design another box. A science museum, of all things, deserved to be a living lesson in science. It had to be more than a container for exhibits. It had to be the exhibit. My mind kept returning to the microscopic world, to the unseen architects of the natural kingdom. And that's where I found my inspiration, in the elegant, breathtakingly complex structure of a diatom. Diatoms are single-celled algae, encased in a shell of silica called a frustule. Under a microscope, they look like jewels, tiny glass boxes of almost impossible intricacy, perforated with a pattern of pores that are both beautiful and brutally efficient, allowing the organism to exchange nutrients with its environment. It was a perfect metaphor, a structure of glass and silica, strong yet porous, simple in concept but infinitely complex in execution. This became the soul of my design. I named it the diatom. The building's entire facade would be a double-layered skin of intelligent glass and porous, recycled aluminum, mimicking the diatom's frustule. The outer layer would be embedded with a new generation of transparent photovoltaic cells, turning the entire building into a solar generator, a quiet act of photosynthesis on a massive scale. The porous inner layer would create a convection current, drawing cool air from a geothermal system deep below the foundation and expelling hot air through a central atrium. A passive cooling system inspired by those termite mounds I had obsessed over as a child. A network of channels in the roof, modeled on the veins of a pitcher plant, would harvest every drop of rainwater, filter it, and use it for the building's plumbing and to irrigate the native plant life on its green roofs. It was the most ambitious, most complex, most beautiful thing I had ever conceived. It was everything I believed in, rendered in glass and light and air. It was my heart and soul turned into a blueprint. As I finalized the submission package, a wave of pure terror washed over me. I looked at the finished renderings, at this monument of sustainable ideals, and all I could hear was my father's voice. Asterisk, it's weak. It's a distraction. Asterisk, was this magnificent dream just another mud pie? I almost deleted the files. My hand hovered over the mouse, a tremor of doubt shaking my entire body. I squeezed my eyes shut and saw the pitying look on my father's face, the smug smirk on Leo's. And in that moment, the fear was burned away by a sudden, clarifying surge of anger. They would never see. They would never understand. But a blind judging panel, they might. I uploaded the dozens of files to the city's secure server. I typed in the anonymous identifier I had chosen, Ethelgard01. I hit submit, and the screen flashed a confirmation. It was done. The die was cast. My secret was out in the world, faceless and nameless, left to fend for itself. The weeks that followed were a special kind of torture. The silence from the city was absolute. Meanwhile, in the loud, brash world of Valerius construction, things were anything but silent. The Science Museum was the only thing my father and brother talked about. They were moving heaven and earth to secure the construction contract, which would be awarded after the winning design was chosen. They saw it as their birthright, the jewel in the Valerius crown. We're putting together the most aggressive bid this city has ever seen, Leo boasted one Sunday, slapping a thick binder down on the dinner table. We'll come in so far under budget, they'd be insane not to choose us. Doesn't matter what over-designed monstrosity some prima donna architect comes up with. We can build anything. The key is to manage the architect, my father added, nodding sagely. They get these grand ideas, no concept of practicality or budget. You have to know how to handle them, flatter them a little, then guide them back to reality. The architect has the vision, but the builder has the power. They shared a look of mutual, arrogant understanding. I just pushed my food around my plate, my stomach a knot of anxiety. Then, one Tuesday morning, the first piece of news broke. The city had made its decision. A press release was issued, announcing the selection of the winning design for the new Science Museum. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked the link. And there it was. On every major news site, glowing under the headline of Vision for the Future, was my building. The diatom. They didn't name the architect. As per the rules, the identity was still under wraps. They only referred to the design by its code name, Ethelgard01. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The design was a sensation. Commentators and critics lauded it as revolutionary, breathtaking, a perfect marriage of art and science. The mayor's office released a statement calling it a bold and brilliant symbol of our city's commitment to the future. I sat in my office, staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face. It was a moment of the purest, most profound validation I had ever felt. They saw it. They understood. My work wasn't a distraction. It was a headline. My elation was quickly followed by a new, colder wave of dread. The next step was the announcement of the construction contract. I knew Valerius Construction's bid would be formidable. A few weeks later, the second shoe dropped. I was at my desk when my phone rang. It was Leo. "Little sister," he crowed, his voice obnoxiously loud. "Are you sitting down? You are officially speaking to the man who is going to build the new Science Museum. The city just called. We got it. The contract is ours." I murmured a congratulations, my voice barely a whisper. "It's the biggest project in the company's history," he went on, oblivious to my shock. "Dad is already popping the champagne. We're going to have to work with whatever genius designed that weird glass bubble thing. But hey, for a 9-figure contract, I'll play nice with anyone. Maybe we can even find a spot for you in the project. You can design the recycling bins for the cafeteria. Give it your little sustainable touch. He laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves like grinding stone. Then my father got on the line, his voice booming with triumph. "Cecilia, wonderful news. We're having the official press conference with the mayor next Tuesday at City Hall to announce the partnership. It's a huge media event. We want you to be there, of course. It's important for the family to present a united front." A united front. The words hung in the air. I knew what he meant. He wanted me there as a prop. The quirky, artistic daughter, standing in the back, smiling supportively, a silent testament to the magnanimity of the great Richard Valerius. A piece of set dressing for their grand performance. My blood ran cold, then hot. The trap was not of my making, but it was perfectly laid. They had no idea that the prima donna architect with the weird glass bubble thing was me. They had no idea that the contract they had just signed legally obligated them to build my vision to my exact specifications under my supervision. And they had just invited me to the very event where all of this would be made public. "Of course, Father," I said, my voice suddenly calm and clear. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The ballroom at City Hall was a suffocating crush of power and perfume. It was an old-world room, all gilded plasterwork and heavy velvet curtains, a space designed to make people feel small and insignificant. Reporters with television cameras lined the walls, their lenses like a firing squad. City officials in dark suits clustered together, whispering. The air was thick with anticipation. I stood in the third row, exactly where my father had gestured for me to stand. He and Leo were at the front of the room, positioned beside the podium, basking in the glow of the stage lights. They looked like conquering heroes. My father, in his impeccably tailored suit, projected an aura of unshakable authority. Leo stood beside him, a hand-in-pocket smirk plastered on his face, looking for all the world like a prince who had just been handed his kingdom. As they had walked in, Leo had leaned in close to me, his breath smelling of expensive cologne and self-satisfaction. "Just smile and clap when we're on stage, Cece," he'd whispered, a conspiratorial pat on my arm. "Try to look proud. This is the big leagues." I had just nodded, my heart a cold, heavy drum in my chest. I was wearing a suit I'd bought specifically for this day, a sharp, dark gray ensemble that felt less like clothing and more like armor. My portfolio, containing a copy of the contract and the key design specifications, was in a sleek leather briefcase at my feet. The press conference began. My father was the first to speak. He strode to the podium with the confidence of a man who owned the world. He spoke in his deep, resonant voice, weaving a grand narrative of Valerius Construction's history. He talked about integrity, about strength, about a legacy of building the very bones of the city. He used words like uncompromising, powerful, and permanent. It was a speech I had heard in various forms my entire life. It was a hymn to concrete and steel, a dismissal of anything that could be perceived as soft or yielding. Then Leo took his turn. He was all youthful energy and swagger, talking about logistics, timelines, and the sheer scale of the project. He made a joke about the unconventional design, and how Valerius Construction was the only firm in the region with the muscle to tame such a wild beast. The crowd chuckled. My father beamed. They were a perfect team, the stoic patriarch and the charismatic heir. They commanded the room. Finally, the mayor, Evelyn Reed, approached the podium. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense intelligence. She began by formally congratulating Valerius Construction on winning the competitive bidding process for the contract. My father and Leo nodded graciously, accepting the praise as their due. But then the mayor's tone shifted. She turned her focus from the builders to the building itself. "We are proud of the robust and fair process that led us to this day," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But I want to be clear. The contract to build is one half of the equation. The other half, the soul of this project, is the design we are here to celebrate. We didn't just want another building. We wanted a beacon, a testament to where we are going, not just where we have been." I saw Leo's smirk flicker. He glanced at my father, a silent question in his eyes. This was not the kind of language they were comfortable with. Soul and beacons didn't have line items on a budget sheet. The international design competition was held anonymously for a very specific reason, Mayor Reed continued, her voice gaining strength. "We wanted to remove all prejudice. We wanted to strip away the power of brand names and reputations and allow pure, unadulterated vision to rise to the top. The selection committee, composed of some of the world's leading architects and scientists, was astounded by one submission in particular. She gestured to a large screen behind her, and my design, the diatom, materialized in a stunning 3D rendering. A collective gasp went through the room. Even now, seeing it on this scale, it took my breath away. The design, submitted under the code name Ethelgard-01, is more than a museum, the mayor declared. It is a living ecosystem, a building that breathes, that thinks, that generates its own power from the sun and harvests its own water from the rain. It is a work of profound genius and breathtaking beauty. I watched my father and brother. They were staring at the screen, their expressions frozen. The condescending amusement was gone, replaced by a dawning unease. This was not the weird glass bubble they had joked about. This was something far more complex, far more challenging than they had imagined. I could almost see the dollar signs spinning in their eyes, the logistical nightmares unfolding in their minds. The selection was unanimous, the mayor said, her voice ringing with finality. And while the physical construction will be in the very capable hands of Richard and Leo Valerius, we must give credit where it is most profoundly due. The vision, the heart, and the unwavering genius of this project belong entirely to its architect. The room was utterly silent. The air crackled. This was the moment. My briefcase felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It is therefore my immense honor, Mayor Reed said, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across her face, to finally reveal the identity of this singular talent. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce the brilliant mind behind the diatom, Miss Cecilia Valerius. For a full 3 seconds, nothing happened. The name just hung in the air, an impossible sound. Then, a ripple of confusion spread through the press corps. Heads started to turn, reporters scanning the crowd, searching for a face to match the name. I looked directly at my father. His face had gone completely slack, his mouth slightly agape. The robust, confident color had drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of shock. Leo was even more transparent. His jaw literally dropped. His eyes, wide with a comical expression of horror, darted from the mayor to the screen, and then finally to me, standing in the third row. His brain seemed to be short-circuiting, unable to process the data. The smug prince had vanished, replaced by a gawking fool. A reporter in the front row, a man who had covered our family for years, finally spotted me. His eyes widened, and he slowly lifted his camera. The flash that followed was like a starter pistol. Suddenly, every camera in the room swiveled towards me, a barrage of blinding light. My legs felt unsteady like stilts made of jelly, but I forced myself to move. I took a breath, straightened my armored suit, and stepped out of the row. The walk to the podium was the longest journey of my life. The sound in the room was a low, rising murmur of disbelief. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, but I only saw 2 faces. As I passed the front row, I allowed myself a brief, clinical glance at my family. My father looked like he had been struck by lightning. My brother looked like he was going to be sick. The foundation of their world had just crumbled to dust, and they were staring at the fault line, and it was me. I did not offer them a smile. I did not offer them any acknowledgement at all. I kept my gaze fixed forward on Mayor Reed, who was watching me with a warm, knowing expression. I reached the podium and she took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Congratulations, Ms. Valerius," she said, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "You've earned this." I turned to face the microphone, the blinding flashes of the cameras, the sea of astonished faces. I let my gaze drift over the crowd and settle, for just one beat, on my father and brother, who were now trapped on the stage like actors in a play for which they had forgotten all their lines. "Thank you, Mayor Reed," I said, and I was immensely proud that my voice came out clear and steady, without a hint of a tremor. "I am deeply honored that the city has placed its faith in my vision." I paused, letting the words land. "And I very much look forward to working closely with the contractors to ensure that my design is executed perfectly." The last word was not a promise. It was a verdict. The room exploded into a chaotic symphony of shouted questions. But I didn't hear them. I was just watching the utter devastation dawn on the faces of the 2 men who had spent my entire life telling me I was nothing more than a distraction. The press conference shattered into 1,000 pieces of chaos. Reporters, smelling the blood in the water, surged forward, a frantic mob of microphones and cameras. My father and brother were instantly engulfed, trapped on the stage under a barrage of questions they were utterly unprepared to answer. "Mr. Valerius, were you aware your own daughter was the architect? Did you know about this when you signed the contract? Leo, you called the design a wild beast. How does it feel to know your sister designed it?" They stood there, blinking in the flashbulb storm, their faces pale and stunned, looking not like titans of industry but like 2 men who had just walked off a cliff. Mayor Reed's security team materialized at my side. "This way, Ms. Valerius," one of them said, his voice a calm island in the sea of noise. They guided me through a side door and into a quiet, stately anteroom, shutting the door on the pandemonium. For a moment, there was blessed silence. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding for my entire life. The silence lasted for approximately 45 seconds. The door to the anteroom burst open, slamming against the wall with a crack that echoed the shattering of our family's dynamic. It was Richard and Leo. Their faces were no longer shocked, they were thunderous masks of fury. "What in God's name was that?" my father snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He wasn't speaking to an architect or a colleague. He was speaking to the errant child. You deceived us, Cecilia. You made a public spectacle of this family. Leo, his face flushed a blotchy red, stalked towards me, jabbing a finger in my direction. This has to be some kind of sick joke. A stunt. You can't be serious. You can't possibly think you're going to tell us how to build something. We pour foundations that could survive a meteor strike. You draw flowers on buildings. I remained perfectly still watching them. The fear I had lived with for so long, the desperate need for their approval, was gone. It had been cauterized in the fire of the press conference, leaving behind something hard and cool and clear. I looked from my brother's sputtering rage to my father's apoplectic face, and I felt nothing but a distant clinical pity. Deceive you? I asked, my voice chillingly calm. It was a voice they had never heard from me before, and it stopped them cold. I submitted my work under an anonymous code to a competition that was open to the entire world. The city of its own free will chose my design. And then, I continued, my gaze locking onto my father's, the city, also of its own free will, chose your company based on your bid to build it. You, father, signed a legally binding, ironclad contract. A contract to construct the winning design to its exact specifications under the full and final supervision of the designated architect. I let that sink in, watching the realization dawn in their eyes. The contract, the document they had pursued with such arrogance, was now a cage of their own making. That architect, I said, enunciating each word with precision, is me. So, to answer your question, Leo, yes. I seriously think I am going to supervise you. You're going to build my museum. You will build the diatom, and you will build it exactly as I designed it. Leo opened his mouth, then closed it again, speechless for the first time in his life. My father took a step forward, his fists clenched. We will not be humiliated. We will not be managed by our own daughter, by a girl who thinks buildings should be modeled on weeds. That's where you're wrong, I said, reaching down and clicking open my briefcase. I pulled out a thick folder, a copy of the one my lawyer had helped me prepare weeks ago, and placed it on the polished mahogany table between us. You will be managed by me. Because if you attempt to breach this contract, if you try to change one single element of my design without my written approval, the penalty clauses alone will bankrupt Valerius Construction overnight. And that's before the city's legal department sues you into oblivion and has you permanently blacklisted from every public and private contract in this hemisphere. Your legacy, I said, using their favorite word like a weapon, will be a smoking crater where your company used to be. Your name will be a synonym for failure. I leaned back, my work done. So, by all means, tell me again how you will not be humiliated. They stared at the folder on the table, as if it were a venomous snake. The fury in their eyes was slowly being extinguished by the cold, dawning horror of their predicament. They were trapped. They were powerful, arrogant men, used to bending the world to their will, and they had been rendered utterly powerless by a secret I had kept and a contract they had signed. The silence in the room was absolute, filled only by the weight of their spectacular, self-inflicted defeat. The builder, my father had once said, has the power. I watched them, broken and silent, and I thought, not today. The months that followed the press conference were a masterclass in tension. The air on the construction site was thick enough to be excavated. We were a family, and we were at war, a cold war fought over blueprints and budget lines. The first official site meeting was a scene I will replay in my mind forever. It took place in a drafty trailer, the table littered with rolls of architectural drawings. I sat at the head of the table. My father and Leo sat opposite me, their postures rigid, their faces grim. They tried initially to fall back on their old patterns. Richard, with a wave of his hand, dismissed the geothermal heating and cooling system as an unnecessary and expensive complication. A standard commercial HVAC system will be far more practical, he declared, not looking at me, but at the site foreman. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply tapped a clause on the copy of the contract that was now my constant companion. Section C, subsection 12A, I said, my voice even. The contract you signed specifies a closed-loop geothermal exchange system, as detailed in Appendix G. It is not optional. Please revise the procurement order and the installation schedule to reflect the design specifications. The foreman looked from me to my father, his eyes wide. My father's jaw tightened. A muscle pulsed in his cheek. He said nothing. Leo tried a different tactic, friendly, patronizing reason. Cece, look, he said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial smile that didn't reach his eyes. This photovoltaic skin, it's beautiful on paper. But the specified glass is a custom order from Germany. It'll add 6 months to the timeline. We can get a similar-looking product from a domestic supplier for half the price. A similar-looking product, I repeated, meeting his gaze. Does the domestic product have the same energy conversion efficiency rating of 22% and a 95% light transparency index? Leo blinked. Well, no, but... Then it is not similar. I cut in, my voice sharp. It is inferior. The design's energy-neutral status depends on that specific rating. The contract specifies that rating. Find a way to expedite the German order, or find another supplier who can meet the spec. Your choice. This was our new dynamic. They would push, and I, armed with the unassailable power of their own signature, would not yield. For weeks, every interaction was a battle of wills. They saw me not as the architect, but as an obstructionist, a child playing at being in charge. But with every battle I won, with every calm, firm refusal to compromise my vision, a strange thing began to happen. The ground began to shift. Leo was the first to change. He was at his core a pragmatist. His frustration with me began to be outweighed by a grudging curiosity about the design itself. He was a builder, and he couldn't help but be intrigued by a complex puzzle. One afternoon, he found me alone in the trailer, reviewing the plans for the rainwater harvesting system. I don't get it, he said, forgoing any preamble. He pointed at the schematics. This network of channels, the filtration sequence, it's ridiculously complicated. Why not just use a standard cistern and a pump? For the first time, he was asking a genuine question, not making a hostile declaration. I took a breath and explained. I walked him through the biomimicry, how the channels mimic the fractal branching of a river delta to maximize surface area and control flow, how the multi-stage filtration system using sand, charcoal, and native reeds was self-cleaning and required almost no energy. He listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. So the roof, it doesn't just collect water, he said slowly. It cleans it. For free. Essentially, yes, I said. He shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible motion of wonder. That's damn clever. It was the first compliment he had ever given my work. It was a tiny crack in the wall between us, but through it, a sliver of light shone through. From that day on, Leo became a tentative, unlikely ally. He started to see the building not as a series of obstacles, but as an elegant, interlocking system. He began to take pride in solving the challenges it presented, and he started to push back against our father's stubborn, blanket resistance. Richard was a much harder case. For him, this was not a professional challenge, it was a personal humiliation. He was a king in exile, forced to watch his kingdom be reshaped by the one person he had never taken seriously. He barely spoke to me, communicating through intermediaries whenever possible. His presence on site was a thundercloud of resentment. The turning point with my father came almost a year into the project. The superstructure was up, the magnificent glass skin was being installed, and the building was beginning to reveal its true, breathtaking form. A delegation of architects from a prestigious European institute had arranged a tour of the site. I led them through the soaring atrium, explaining the passive ventilation and the play of light. They were enthralled, peppering me with technical questions and lavishing praise on the design's audacity and intelligence. My father was there, standing off to the side, silent and brooding. The lead architect of the delegation, a famous, elderly man from Switzerland, approached him. "You must be the father of the architect," the man said, his voice thick with a German accent. "Your daughter, she is not just a builder of buildings. She is a builder of ideas. A true visionary. You must be immensely proud." My father was struck dumb. He simply stared as this giant of his own profession walked away to congratulate me further. In that moment, he was forced to see me not through his own clouded eyes, but through the clear, admiring eyes of his peers. He was forced to confront the reality that the world did not see his daughter as a distraction. They saw her as a star. He didn't apologize. That was not his way. But something in him broke that day. His resistance softened, replaced by a quiet, bewildered observation. He started watching me on the site, not with anger, but with a kind of baffled curiosity. A few days later, I found a book lying on my desk in the trailer. It was a very old, worn, first-edition copy of a seminal text on structural engineering. It was my father's most prized possession, a book he had quoted from my entire life. There was no note. None was needed. It was his white flag, his silent, reluctant surrender. 2 years later, the diatom was complete. It was more beautiful than I had ever imagined. It stood not as a monument to power, but as a testament to intelligence, a shimmering jewel of glass and light that seemed to change with the sky. It won nearly every major architectural award that year. At the grand opening gala, I stood at a podium once again. The room was filled with the city's elite, with architects and scientists from around the world. In the front row sat my father and my brother. Leo looked proud, his face lit with a genuine smile. My father looked older, quieter, but his eyes, for the first time, held a clear, unmistakable expression of respect. I gave my speech, thanking the mayor, the committee, Dr. Thorne. Then I looked at my family. I would also like to thank the team at Valerius Construction, I said, my voice clear. Their dedication and expertise were essential in bringing this complex and challenging vision to life. It was not an easy build, but they met every challenge with integrity and skill. I paused and offered them a small smile. It turns out we make a pretty good team. It was an olive branch, but one I offered from a position of unassailable strength. I hadn't set out to conquer my family. I had only ever wanted to be seen by them. But along the way, I had learned a far more important lesson. The validation I had so desperately craved from them was a pale imitation of the validation I had finally found within myself. Their respect, when it finally came, was welcome, but it was no longer necessary. My foundation was no longer their approval. My foundation was the magnificent, breathing, light-filled building behind me. I had finally built something permanent. So, now I turn it over to you. Was I wrong to keep my submission a secret? Should I have told them from the start? Or was the shock of the reveal the only thing that could have ever changed their perspective? I truly want to know what you would have done in my shoes. Share your story in the comments below, especially if you've ever had to fight to have your voice heard in your own family or workplace. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about turning the tables and finding your own strength. Thank you for listening to my story. The journey was harder than I could have ever imagined, but it led me here. Remember, your value is not determined by those who underestimate you. Sometimes the fact that they don't see you coming can be your greatest advantage. Build your own vision, and you will build your own world.